Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Gatherverse. For those who are just joining us, we have had an excellent day 2 of Gatherverse, and you are joining us at the education panel, which will be focusing on the evolution of EdTech and the rise of EdTech Plus. My name is Hussainatu Blake. I'm professor at Middlebury Institute of International Studies, where I teach global education for the future. So I'm super excited about this panel. And we have an expert panel of speakers. We really, really do. And instead of me introducing them, I would want them to introduce themselves and tell you all a little bit about who they are, what they do, and how they fit in the EdTech space. So I will first start with Jim Bradbury. How are you, Jim?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. My name is Jim Bradbury. I've been in the interactive games and media space for just shy over 20 years. I actually got started in video games, developed my own mobile game studio, and sold that to Konami and ran their mobile game operations in North and South America for a number of years. In that, we did some kind of like e-learning type applications as well. From there, moved on to building out simulation-based interactive experiences for companies like Honda and Microsoft. Ended up moving more into the VR world and doing VR and fitness. And in my latest capacity, I'm the COO of Librarium VR. And what we do is we do experiential-based learning in VR with our first product launching this August, which is basically test prep in VR. Along with that, I'm also the board member for a technical charter high school here in Idaho. That's me.
Welcome, Jim. Steve?
Hi, everyone. Steve Buchanan here. So I recently joined Microsoft, and I'm at Microsoft helping to improve the cloud. And so I'm a principal program manager at Microsoft. I've been in technology for 20 plus years. I'm an author. I'm an author of books. So I've authored 8 books around various technologies, most recently in cloud and DevOps. And then I'm also a Pluralsight author. So I'm in the world of EdTech from an independent perspective. And so I'm happy to be a part of this panel and just give insights.
Thanks so much for joining us. And Natalie?
Hi, I'm Natalie Mathe. I am also an independent creator, an educator, and a consultant on everything regarding virtual reality. I've been working in this space for the past 8 years, and before that, I had a career in the film industry for many years, mostly like animation, VFX. So VR was just like, adding interaction and immersion on top of everything else. As an educator, I've been teaching at different universities, University of the Arts in San Francisco, and then Drexel University in Philadelphia for the past 2 years. And mostly teaching like how to create VR, not like using VR to teach another, specific discipline, but really like the creative aspect of VR.
Well, thank you all for introducing yourselves, and I'm excited to get started in this discussion. As many of you all know out there, EdTech has grown so much since 2020 because of the pandemic, right? And it now has become the second largest industry in the world. And with that, you see the evolution of EdTech and really the rise and the emergence of EdTech Plus. And this is a term that was coined by Owl Ventures, which is the largest EdTech venture capital firm in the world, where they exclusively invest in EdTech startups, companies, resources, tools, and they have said that EdTech Plus is basically the intersection of EdTech with other industries like healthcare and business, fintech, legal, media, etc. So the reason why I bring this up is because you all have diverse backgrounds in EdTech. And I wanted to first start off with an icebreaker. There's a statement that was made by the managing director of Our Ventures that stated, the world's most valuable companies are eventually going to be in EdTech. I'm wondering if you all agree with that. And if you do, what do you think? Why is that true and how so? We can start with Steve based off of his background.
Yeah, so I'm going to give kind of a consultant answer to that. I'm going to say yes and no. I mean, we're seeing very large, valuable companies such as Microsoft, right, have entered that EdTech space. We've seen Microsoft acquire companies like Flipgrid, Take Lessons, and kind of integrate those technologies. And then we've also seen, you know, Microsoft acquire LinkedIn, and now we have LinkedIn Learning. So there's EdTech there. And we're seeing companies like Google, you know, with things like Google Classroom and just expanding in those areas as well. And so I think there's some truth to that, but I also think there's some businesses, companies that will be very, very valuable that may not enter the space. And so I think, you know, due to COVID and the pandemic and things that happen with, you know, stay-at-home orders and stuff like that, it really has increased the need for, you know, EdTech, remote learning, and just being remote in general. So I think more and more companies are going to look in the space of EdTech from a remote perspective and a metaverse perspective.
Mm-hmm. Natalie, what is your take?
Yeah, I definitely think that education and lifelong learning are super important, and with EdTech, you know, it allows to do that remotely at your own rhythm, or, you know, so whether it's for students or adults, it's definitely a big part of our life nowadays, even since COVID, you know. But at the same time, I also think that we need to change how we teach, and that teaching skills or teaching how to is great, but teaching how to be is like even more important nowadays. So, you know, the technology alone is not going to solve any of the problems that we are facing. And I do think it's, you know, crucial to recreate human-to-human connections and to learn to do that with digital technology as well as in real life. So, yeah.
I do have a follow-up question for you before I move on to Jim. You state, you know, creating these face-to-face interactions are crucial, and we can use technology to do it. Can you expound more on how your experience in XR, right, has allowed you to be able to do that?
Yeah, definitely. During the pandemic, I worked with some of my students to meet in XR and basically to create their own world, because they were feeling very isolated or depressed. So we worked together to create virtual worlds in which they could like resource themselves, re-energize, meet with their friends, and you know, create connections again that they were missing in real life. So I don't think it's a substitute, you know, and young people really need like in real life connections, and everyone in fact. But definitely I could see like how they were alive, how they, you know, they had fun meeting in those worlds and being like totally enjoying being able to meet this way. So it made a big difference compared to just the Zoom classes, and having them create their own world, was also super important. Like, how do they regenerate and like heal themselves? We have to trust them that they can find their own solutions.
Jim, what is your take on this icebreaker question?
I think I'm probably a little bit more bullish than Steve on the pace at which industries are adopting EdTech plus type platforms and strategies, especially when it comes to workforce training. I think it's very prevalent. If you look at even old school Fortune 500 companies like Xerox, they have a subsidiary company named Care AR, where they're training technicians for copiers remotely using tablets, utilizing AR and VR technologies. And I think that over the last, probably 5 years, there's been a pretty big interest level in companies being able to become more efficient by being able to teach their employees more efficiently at scale. And in ways that are sustainable. And that goes beyond just kind of like the regular technical training stuff. I mean, there are also applications out there for soft skills development in HR, soft skills development in the legal industry. I would say probably it's a bit harder to make that EdTech kind of forecast for the finance industry, just because it tends to be not quite lending itself to a lot of mass training of employees. But I think if we fold in workforce training, I think that we're pretty far along in that statement being true. And I also think that the pace at which that more companies and industries are jumping into EdTech strategies is only accelerating.
You know what, you raised such a great point, especially when it comes to workforce development, right? Many people think about EdTech and they think about it in the traditional sense, right? In a classroom or being able to teach traditional courses. But a lot of EdTech is really moving in the direction that Jim has mentioned in workforce development, whether it be getting certified in skills that you need to get a job or improving skills that you may have, but they need to be updated. With that comes issues with equity and access, right? I want to know a little bit about, especially from your take, Jim, about how this EdTech opportunity and shift towards workforce development is actually leveling out the playing field when we're talking about equity and access to not only education, but as you mentioned, skill sets.
Well, I would think that I would split that up into kind of two different things, because I think equity of access is different than leveling the playing field and who can receive any type of instruction, right? And I think they're both, two different issues that have to be solved. In terms of how does it leverage the playing field, if you can distribute curriculum to somebody who might not normally be in a place where they would be able to receive it, that's probably the easiest way to describe it, right? If you have a high school curriculum that's going out to a rural community and it's being delivered with technology so that there's access to it in that regard, then those students are going to be able to get a higher level in a different type of curriculum than they've been able to receive in the past. So I think that's probably like a bare level answer for that. The equity of access to me, I think, probably a little bit more pressing problem that we have. And that comes down to, developing countries, rural areas, even within the United States, where if they don't have the devices and the connectivity, which is really the most important thing, then whatever we're doing from a technology standpoint with education begins to be really limited, right? If you don't have good connectivity in order to be able to access services or online communities or online platforms, then you're not going to be able to use them. You would be basically restricted just to applications that are on device that don't require any type of connectivity at all. So I think that connectivity issue is probably one of the biggest things to solve, especially in developing countries, but it's also something that we face in the United States as well.
I would like to get your take on this, Steve, too, considering your background and some of the certifications that you have. How is EdTech speaking to equity and access?
Yeah, so I'll kind of answer in two parts as well. So just kind of piggybacking on the workforce development. So we've seen, with Accenture, they recently acquired 60,000 Oculus headsets.
Yeah.
And so they're using those when they're onboarding new employees to train them. And so that was an interesting move. And I think a really positive move for the Metaverse, right? Having those headsets and being able to do some training there. And so they have a lot of efforts around diversity and inclusion as well. So it's good to see a company like that making those kind of steps. Now, as far as equity, I agree with Jim that, connectivity is it's probably the biggest issue, depending on where, folks are located, rural areas, developing countries, stuff like that. I have seen through, many of my business connections and friends that are over in various countries in Africa, in expansion, and interest in technology through mobile devices. That's really been a game changer there. And there are efforts underway to increase connectivity, and hopefully those will continue to move forward. And that'll just expand the ability to have access to different EdTech and jobs and all of the above. I'm also involved with some groups. So Black Data Processing Associates, BDPA. We've seen BDPA with the pandemic and with COVID really shift towards remote models for learning for youth. And so what they do is they have training that's free for youth, underrepresented youth, and they had to switch very, very quickly from in-person. They would typically bring youth into classrooms, and so there would be computers there supplied for the youth to be able to learn, and they had to switch to remote. And one of the barriers that I've seen through some of those classes is, some of the kids will have iPads and they'll access the classes on iPads. They'll have iPads from their schools, but they might not have a full-blown computer. And we were trying to teach kids, full coding or technologies. It could be a challenge from an iPad. So, connectivity is a big issue, as well as making sure that, like youth, especially underrepresented, have machines to be able to work on that. And then when we talk about the Metaverse specifically, they might not have access to Oculus devices and other, devices to access the Metaverse. So we're going to have to get over those challenges as this continues to expand to make sure it's an equal playing field.
And Natalie, what is your take? I know that you spoke a little bit about how you don't necessarily use it in your teaching, but what have you seen?
Well, definitely, computers and VR equipment are needed when you are trying to teach VR, or cameras and stuff like that. So I saw definitely a huge shift between before the pandemic, when I was teaching in person and they could access, the computers at the university, and then teaching remote when they had their computers at home. And thankfully, I was able to ship them headsets and cameras and everything. And we had fantastic projects done, even short films done between someone sitting in Saudi Arabia and someone being in Philadelphia and someone being in yet another country. So, but in terms of computers, I really saw the struggles. Some students didn't have the home computers that were powerful enough to, to be able to do VR. And in that case, some of the policies of the university, like they don't adapt really fast, so there was no access. It was forbidden, and getting access approved for those students who did not have a computer was very, very complicated to put it nicely. And also there are aspects of working with computers at home that were actually way more flexible, because in VR we often use beta programs, the latest software, whatever. And while the schools have like very strict policies on what kind of software can be downloaded or approved, which is great because it's protecting the privacy and safety of the students. Sometimes it can also like slow down or make it more complicated. So definitely being able to use home computer, was easier in some ways also. So it's a mixed bag, and but definitely, I would suggest that if you do a class, online that requires, specific equipment or more than an iPad, or, whether it's coding, whether it's creating VR world, whether it's like editing videos, then, we should ship the equipment to the students for the duration of the class so they can use it. And yes, the internet access is another one. Yeah.
Yes, we have many comments in the chat about rural communities, right? Here in the United States, and having students in those communities have access to some of the resources and tools and experiences that other people may have. Can we speak a little bit about the solutions, right? I know that we talked about the issues, right? And I know that Steve mentioned certain organizations out there doing the work. Are you seeing more of those types of organizations out there really speaking to those challenges, specifically when it comes to rural communities and students or learners in general in those communities?
I'm happy to take a lead. I can speak locally for Idaho. Our team recently led a not-for-profit called the Idaho Virtual Reality Council, and we put over 35,000 people directly into VR experiences over the course of about 3 years. And that was kind of an effort to both evangelize the technology, but also to be able to support institutions and companies that were providing AR and VR services and try to get them more exposure. But one of the partnerships that we put together was with the Idaho STEM Action Center. And the Idaho STEM Action Center came up with a program where very specifically we would bundle together these kits with HTC Vive units with a company named Blocksmith up in Idaho. They have a kind of like a builder type of software. We would give them a curriculum, and then these kits were sent out to rural schools on loan, and actually on a grant process. They got to keep the equipment, including we brought in HP to provide laptops. It ended up being a really good program where, over the course of, I think, the 3 years that we were a part of it, we were routinely getting 25 to 30 rural schools access to technology and into their classrooms that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to have. So I think that there are some good programs out there. I'm less aware of programs on a larger national or international basis that are trying to accomplish the same thing specifically. We just took a look at the Idaho STEM Action Center took a look at the needs of the rural communities that we have here in Idaho, and trying to think of ways to be able to give them the tools that they need so that they can teach students and give those students more opportunities. So I think there are a lot of great grassroots ways to be able to build relationships with those schools, with those areas that need that type of either a device or technology access. I also think that it needs to be something that is a priority in terms of larger companies and in regards to how they want to support the growth and adoption of their technologies, and very specifically, with VR, right? The headsets as they are right now are, while the prices have dropped, they're still relatively expensive, I would say, for the average family. And if we want to really be able to build any type of metaverse that is providing substantive education opportunities for groups of people, then we need to make sure that there are enough headsets out there that people can have access to, and that they have equal access to, right? Because once you get into institutions like schools, whether it's primary, secondary, or university, then you start looking at, you have to have multi-use access. You can't have logins that are tied into Facebook. So there are a lot of different kind of issues that we need to tackle in order to be able to create any type of really metaverse-oriented, large EdTech ecosystem. I hope that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. I do want to get quickly to some of the questions that I've seen in the chat. The first one being and this goes out to all the panelists, any use cases for the panelists' ideal design for integrating synchronous and asynchronous EdTech learning?
Well, I come from the world of video games, so multiplayer is, when we talk about synchronous and asynchronous, that's a pretty complex question. I'm not sure there's really any one best ultimate way to do it. Realistically, you have to kind of figure out what you want to offer and then find the best way to support that.
Yeah, I would say you definitely want to keep the online synchronous, interaction for social interaction with students and teacher interaction with students and students. That's super important to create a dynamic, and also, the students as researcher and learner and creators, creating together, researching and learning together. So it's a very different model from a teacher downloading some knowledge onto students. And offline, you can still have lectures, you can still have things that they can share and watch. But really, we should consider online as a privileged time, and also a short time. You don't want someone to sit for 3 hours, online. So it's really a matter of thinking what's the most appropriate for each medium. Yeah.
We do have another question from Rod. He asks, how do I provide my family education in the metaverse safely from our home? I know that's moving away from access and equity and asynchronous and synchronous, but really, providing, once you are over those barriers and you want to participate in the metaverse, he wants to know, how do you do it safely from home?
So I don't have an answer specifically to that question, but I do think as companies continue to build out the metaverse, right, like Meta, like Microsoft, like Roblox, companies need to think about that, and companies need to keep that top of mind. For example, with mobile devices, parents needed parental controls, and there are solutions out there, right? There are apps, there are some solutions out there from Apple. There's some solutions out there from Google and Microsoft as well. Now, those things are just as important as more and more youth and families move into the metaverse, and as more and more schools start to educate in the metaverse, and as more and more companies, right? For example, Accenture with the 60,000 Oculus headsets, they need to figure out governance and controls as well. As more and more companies are moving education into that metaverse, like someone needs to create those controls, whether it comes from those big companies or maybe it can be some sort of add-on controls from smaller startups. I think there's a huge opportunity there.
I would build on that by saying, honestly, after putting that many people through VR experiences for the first time, like, and even there was a report saying that, one of the major insurance companies is reporting record earnings because of VR players jumping into furniture, which is like another, like, it's another item for the increase in adoption, but not necessarily the place that you would normally look for it. I think there's physical safety. I think what people are most concerned about is you're putting kids into a social immersive environment, and we need to make sure that they're being treated properly. And I think that there are a lot of applications that have been very successful that a lot of kids use and they have a lot of fun with. But if you go into some of the community areas and you listen to the way that they talk to each other, and the way that I would say online bullying is almost exacerbated a little bit. I think what we have to do is we have to find better standards for us as a development community that we can all adhere to, so that we can create the proper safe boundaries within our experiences, and we can build them all the same way, right? If we can come up with some, a standard of methodologies that we call best practice, that are, we put together some studies that get peer reviewed, and we can find some way to create a space where a parent has a more reliable sense of what type of application they're letting their child into, whether that's education-based or play-based or experiential-based or anything like that. I do think that, it's a little bit different than just online, because you're in an immersive state and you have so much emotional connection to the digital environment that you're in. The impact of words and actions can feel even that much greater, but it's still with that same sense of anonymity where people feel they can say and do things without actually being responsible for what happens from their actions and from their words. So I think it's very important. I think it has to be a core tenet of, as a community, how we move education and EdTech forward in the metaverse. But it's something that's going to have to continue to evolve. This entire industry is still so nascent and growing, and it reminds me very early of the mobile phone, the early mobile phone game years, where it was like the technology was leapfrogging itself every 6 months, right? We're always getting new headsets. There's always new and better headsets. There's new platforms that come out. It can begin to become very complicated to create standards that exist across multiple different product lines and multiple different platform types. So there's a lot there to pay attention to and learn from.
Yeah, if I can add one more thing is I totally agree with Jim. And at the same time, we have to be able to create safe space and healthy relationships, whether it is online or in real life. We all have to learn to do better. And we have to teach, children and young people how to develop those kind of safe and healthy relationships, because those online communities, that's what they are going to be made of. And we can add all kind of community guidelines and tools and AI to monitor the exchange and all of this. But in the end, many people have proven already that whatever tech you use is going to be weaponized in any possible ways if the underlying paradigm is not, based on like respect and dignity and trust and safety. So I think it's super important that we all learn to reconnect with the human system. And the fact that, a lot of the online social media right now is text or image based is bypassing our natural ability to connect with another person, which is based on our body, face, and body sensing and language. So in my opinion, VR is giving us like a better chance to connect as human being, but the double sword is that yes, also bullying and harassment can be much worse. But definitely being embodied, helps in connecting with each other. So we have to learn again, how to connect, even if we are in a digital world, but using our body, using our heart, and creating safety and trust.
To keep on that same train of thought, we just had a question. People want to know, can you give examples, some examples of VR EdTech that is working? Are there any models out there that people are following that makes it more inclusive, but also it creates a community, it's interactive, and it's accessible?
I guess I'll speak from my experience first, if you guys don't mind. We put a lot, like as I mentioned before, we put a lot of people through VR, and it was, going back about 5 years ago. So there was a lot of the early consumer type applications, and there were a lot of training applications that came out. And again, like there's a history behind these things too. You have people that go back 20 years, like our current industry and what we do from a technology and a software standpoint. We are also standing on the shoulders of giants. You have Howard Rose, who's doing stuff in the medical field, Skip Rizzo, who's doing stuff treating veterans. And we're kind of, they're started back in the day when you were using $20,000 headsets and you're in a research environment. I think that the current rise of VR technology and people's access to them and to be able to utilize them is stemmed more from a consumer entertainment standpoint. I think the first thing that kind of came about from an adoption standpoint is you had the gamers out there who wanted to be able to experience their worlds on an awesome HTC Vive headset or an early Oculus, and they wanted to play their favorite games, right? Whether it was Elite or doing something else. What comes along with that is groups that begin to put forward applications that are more oriented towards younger learners. I remember Fantastic Contraption was an app that came out relatively early, and it was basically like having giant ticker toys in front of you, and you could put together the wheels and stitch together an axle and everything, and as soon as you put it all together, it would just get up and it would drive off. It was a fantastic application. I think that it's a secondary effort from the community, from the development community, to start thinking about VR and utilizing it as a platform and creating platform-based applications so that it can be used specifically for education. I think what has come first has been, how do we meet remotely in VR? Right? How do we do for us developers out there? How do we do stand up together in VR? Right? And I think that being the first logical step, the next logical step is, okay, we need to think more platform based. We need to think bigger. And I think that the education aspect of that, and anybody's welcome to correct me if I'm missing something, has been secondary or tertiary to those other things for the adoption of the technology, right? Because if the technology is not adopted, then building something bigger isn't going to make sense for anybody to build.
Steve, do you want to add anything? I do want to mention a comment that was made in the chat, and it's actually a very good point. It was said that some students will be entirely excluded, not because they don't necessarily have access to it, it's because their parents don't necessarily understand or trust the technology. So how do you combat that, right? You have all these opportunities and you have access to it, but if people don't understand, what do you do? Especially the parents.
I think it's important for schools, for any programs like BDPA or other programs that are working with the youth, to also engage with the parents and take some time to educate the parents. Maybe even extend opportunities for the parents to experience the technology themselves. That way they will be less afraid of, their children using the technologies. And I think, that's the first step, is engage the parents.
Before we run out of time, I do want to give all of you an opportunity to discuss not only the future of EdTech Plus, but more specifically, you all's future in EdTech Plus, what you all are doing at your respective companies, and where you would see EdTech going, especially in the Metaverse, in the next 5 or 10 years. You can start, Jim.
All right. I've been talking a lot, so I just want to make sure I'm not hogging. Our company, Librarian VR, we're focused on experiential learning, less from a platform standpoint than from an application-based standpoint. And when we talk about experiential learning, we think that there's a great opportunity for us to be able to create applications that help people develop problem-solving skills, how to become critical thinkers, how to create empathy with their subject matter, have collaboration, have creativity. And we're looking at that from, what can we help people learn, or what can we teach people utilizing spatial technologies that is easier to do using those technologies than it is to do in real life, right? We do have an app that we're launching. It's kind of like the namesake for the company. It's going to launch on Oculus in August. It's called Librarian. It's probably, we believe it's the first study prep application utilizing memory palace techniques in VR. It's very creative. We come from a game background. We put a lot of design into our compulsion loops and our session loops in terms of how is it that we're able to give lifelong learners or people who are studying for the SAT, the MCAT, the LSAT, how do we give them a VR training tool that allows them to be able to learn, do all that flashcard work that they normally do? How can we get them to learn faster? We found that by leveraging memory palace techniques, which are a couple thousand years old, but bring them into a VR environment and putting in real game theory into the process, we've found something that we think is very viable from an experiential learning standpoint for education, leveraging virtual reality. We'll be repeating that that kind of recipe with further applications down the line. Some of that will probably be in simulation-based training. There's a lot of opportunity in there. Others will be in, kind of providing more what I would call common knowledge types of education that you may not have access to. An example I might use would be like, hey, maybe you've always wanted to learn how to sail a boat, but you don't live on a body of water and you don't have a boat and you don't have access to anybody to learn from. Well, that's something that we can actually take and teach you how to do utilizing virtual reality, right? And that's just an example, but there's a broad swath of application or a broad swath of education verticals that we feel are deserving of a tool like VR so that people can learn better, or they can learn something that they don't normally have access to. 5 years down, I'll go 5 years down the line because 10 years down the line, I think we're talking, a lot of interdimensional stuff, which is great and a lot of fun, but probably not this panel. I would say, we do have a big change coming down the pipe with 5G and with privatized cellular access. That's going to be kind of like the gateway for AR. So I think there's going to be a huge explosion from at a population-based level. Once companies are able to support AR, streaming AR at scale in our communities. And I think in the next it's already kind of beginning to happen now, but I think over the next 5 years, it's going to be pretty amazing what the possibilities are in terms of being able to deliver a constant AR presence to a device that you own. And what it can provide for you in your world and how you go about your daily business. So there's going to be a pretty large uptick in the applications and the services that can be provided in that sector. I would say that's probably right around the corner.
Okay. Natalie?
Yeah. So my answer is not just with EdTech, because I'm actually thinking of like taking a step back a little bit from VR to really focus on, how do we empower youth to become future leaders and change makers that are able to face the world in crisis that we have created for them. So we need to teach them like all those skills, and whether it's in person in workshops, whether it's online, whether it's in VR, doesn't matter that much. Like, how do we do it at scale? And I also want to change from teaching to really like co-creating solutions with them and working with youth organizations, not necessarily universities. I mean, I hope with universities as well, but definitely like local youth organizations that are already working with young people at risk, or, and finding solutions for those skills that they need to create a brighter future. That is what I think is the priority right now. And we can use any tech we want, whether it's from mobile phone, games, VR world, whatever. Yeah, collaborating with many different disciplines and many different people to create those, empower those young people to thrive and not be desperate about the world.
Awesome. And Steve?
So from a career perspective, right, from an ed tech perspective, I'm doing the courses, and that's just part of my nature, is I want to share my knowledge with the world. And I think that's going to change. And I've sort of shifted from books to online courses, and who knows where that will shift to. And I think there's tremendous amount of opportunity and growth ahead of us when it comes to the metaverse, AR, VR. It's just going to continue to grow and expand. We have all these companies racing to kind of be the leaders in metaverse. We have startups. We also have, stuff like Decentraland. It's built on blockchain, where it's kind of led by the community. And so, we also have companies like Roblox. And so one thing I know, 5 years down the road is the metaverse, AR, VR, multiverse, whatever you want to call it, it's going to be everywhere. And so, I'm encouraging my kids on a personal level to embrace it. I encourage things like Roblox, and I don't just encourage like the gameplay. I encourage them, and I would encourage anyone to not just be a consumer, but be a creator. And so when my kids are playing on Roblox, I'm not just encouraging them to play the game. I'm encouraging them to, install Roblox Studio, learn how to start coding, learn things like Python, learn JavaScript. Let's get you in some coding classes. Let's get you more exposure so you can be that creator, not just that consumer. And so, I think it's important to contribute to the world that's coming. Multiverse, all of it.
Awesome answers. I really have to say, I've learned so much from all three of you. So I thank you all definitely for your time and for your insights. And I thank all of the attendees who have attended. So please, before we go, I want people to be able to reach you after this. Jim, Steve, Natalie, they are all accessible. Their profiles are on the main R Live page. And I hope that you all enjoyed this panel. There's so much we could have talked about, but it was engaging and it was thought-provoking. So thank you all, and thank you to the panelists.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.